Happy sesquicentennial to us.
Rolls right off the tongue.
And welcome to Dear Watchers, an omniversal comic book podcast where we do a deep dive into the multiverse.
We have been traveling with you for over 150 episodes through the stories and the worlds that make up an omniverse of fictional realities we all love. And your watchers on this long and arduous journey are me, Guido.
Me, Rob. And we have an extra special guest with us today. Yes, it's the person responsible for more than half the views on the new Superman trailer. It's Elliot from ElliotComicArt.
I thought you were going to say something about his responsibility for us, for the show. If you remember, the show was originally something me and Elliot wanted to do, and then I offloaded it to you, Rob. So
well, yes. Elliot's a parent, so he has way too much time. Not enough time, I should say, to do a podcast. A silly little podcast with us.
Well, but he does that. Yeah. He seems to have plenty of time to watch Superman trailers, is what you're saying.
That is true.
I do that in the bathroom. Rob, thank you for being my replacement for these last 150 episodes. And Guido and Rob, thanks so much for having me. For this appearance, I am the secret love child of David Corenswet and Chris Evans.
A dream if ever I had it. So,
Elliot, you said I was subbing you for the last 150 episodes. So does this mean you're taking over from me moving on?
No, he's taking over at 300. When we get to 300,
okay.
We'll take over.
We'll be recording once a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, a special edition once a year.
Well, Guido, before we dive into this very special anniversary episode, what's new in our little section of the multiverse?
Well, we just did a Batman Returns screening. You primarily hosted. We put together a fun pre-show. We do lots of screenings in the upstate New York region, and that was fun and felt deeply connected to the work we're doing. Usually it's horror movies or other action movies, but this one being Batman Returns was very comic booky, and it was very fun to pull some clips and commercials for that. So congratulations, Rob. It's fun that we're we're becoming a multimedia empire.
That's true. Well, and going back to podcasts too, I've wanted to do screenings for a while, but one of the impetus for this was I know our good friends at Comic Book Couples Counseling also host a lot of movie screenings, and they do a lot of superhero movie screenings. So definitely some of the germ of the idea started with them as well. And
one day we'll go to Virginia and join them, and they'll come to New York and join us.
Exactly.
It'll be a mega crossover.
An infinite crisis.
Yes, exactly. But it's our anniversary, so let's get on with the party.
And if you're joining us for the first time, we have 3 parts of our journey through the multiverse: origins of the story, exploring multiversity, and pondering possibility. So thanks for coming along.
And remember, you can leave us a 5-star review as a anniversary present wherever you're listening. And you can find us on most social media at Dear Watchers, or find our old episodes at dearwatchers.com.
And with that, welcome to episode 150.
Wow.
Let's check out what's happening in the Omniverse with our travels to today's alternate universe. Now, normally at this part of the show, we talk about our histories with a famous comic book character or a famous comic book storyline. But since we're kind of looking inward for a lot of today's episode...
Not exclusively, though.
No, we're going to talk about something that just wrapped up this week as we're recording, but I'll throw it out to you all. What is your background with our own podcast?
That's funny. Well, people who've been listening for a long time know our origin, but in case people have jumped in somewhere along the way in these 150, I think we've stayed pretty true to our original mission, which is to explore a different multiverse every episode and to sort of situate it within the context of what's canon, what's not, what we want to see in stories, what we ponder as the future possibilities. So our format's changed a bit. I remember we used to read a lot more in the early days, but it was also still kind of COVID era, so we had a lot more time, and we've pared back a bit. But I think we've stayed true, and we actually have more than 150 episodes because we have some bonus episodes. But this is our formal numbering, 150, and we're at 3.5 years.
Yeah. I remember too, Guido, you and I, as we talked about at the beginning of this episode, you and I really wanted to do a podcast as a way to like formalize talking more often and with our busy schedules. And I think I still have some Google Docs we shared originally. I don't know if you remember this. I was just remembering it as you were talking. We wanted to do kind of a secret origins podcast.
I
We
do
talk
remember.
about where we would talk about our like interview different people and figure out what was their origin into what was their origin story into their comic book fandom. I still love that idea, and we started with an idea of like just you and me and interviewing each other, and then interviewing our good friends and other podcasters, and hopefully growing it into something that I don't think exists anymore. I listen to a lot of comic book interview podcasts that don't really go that deep. I was really interested because I love learning what makes people work and think and what makes them who they are, and why people get into comic books. I think is really different but also unifying, and maybe someday that's a retirement project maybe. But that's how it started. And you were doing Queer Material, and I listened to those. But my origin podcast is I've been in it since day one. I listen every week, and there are certain episodes. I'm a very, I think many people are probably like this, but if I'm doing something and listening to a podcast, if I do it again or listen again, I will remember exactly what I'm doing. And so one of my favorite all-time interviews that you did was with Luciano Vecchio. And I was shoveling my driveway in the winter. And every single time I'm out in the driveway, whether I'm shoveling or there's certain moments, I will remember parts of that interview. And that was a real gift. I really love him and his work in that interview.
That's so fun. What a fun memory.
And I think one thing that we've brought to the podcasting world is actually you, Guido, having, and listeners who've listened, who have followed us on this journey will know you have 30,000 comics. So you are such a comic expert. You're reading all the new books. You know a lot of the storylines. I am coming at it as a comic fan, someone who likes comics, but I don't know nearly as much as you do. And Elliot, I think when you join us, you're kind of in the middle of the two of us there too. So I think it's interesting. Like, I'm kind of coming at it too from like a fan of the medium and a fan of world building. You're coming at it as kind of an expert in those things, and it kind of ultimately balancing out. So we're not just kind of, oh, let's just talk like because we know everything. We certainly don't, or certainly I don't know everything about comics.
I don't. So I forget everything, even if I did know it. So
yeah. I think as the podcast has gone on too, we've gotten a lot more into the history of some of these characters rather than just focus on those single issues. We've gotten into the history of a character or a history of a creator or storyline and kind of dived a little deeper in that way too.
The other thing that I think was really important, and I'm reminded, Elliot, that you and I both function like this. So our planning and brainstorming always included a lot of structure. Yeah. And it's also what Rob and I really like. And so we've held to that, having a structure. And I think that is really fun. And I am glad that we've stuck with it. We refined it a little bit over time in the first couple of episodes, but I think we've stayed pretty true to the 3-part structure we have, looking back, looking present, looking forward. And I really like that way of organizing our thoughts. We've even done it when we've like reviewed movies and stuff like that. We'll use that same structure. So that's another thing I think that we've done and I like.
I love it too, because hope is something that I really like. And the end of every episode is that pondering possibilities where you're just looking forward to the future. It's my favorite part about fandom is that these stories keep changing and growing as we do too. And just always thinking about what's possible and what we get excited about. That's what drove our friendship over the MCU is like, oh my God, who's going to be in this movie? And I think that's the same thing with stories. And it's what I love about the podcast too, is that every week There's reflection, which is important. There's being present, which is important. And then there's being hopeful and excited about the future, which I think is also really cool.
Yeah, and imagining and stuff. Yeah, and predicting, all of that is really good. So, dear listeners, tell us what your origin to our podcast is before we move into our next segment.
Yeah, speaking of structure, let's jump into that first segment, which as always is Origins of the Story.
Right now, on this very show, you're going to get the answer to all your questions. Our amazing story begins a few years ago.
So if you go all the way back to episode 1 in our earliest episodes, you'll know that this actually started not as just a multiverse, omniverse podcast, but a what if podcast.
Well, it was always meant to go beyond. We just started there. And so it is important to return to that.
Yes.
With our 150th episode. But what I'll also point out is we kept the episode naming convention of creating a what if question. And some of those are our most fun conversations. Sometimes they're not when we're recording, trying to figure out when we're reading an Elseworlds or when we're reading some other multiverse, what is the what if question here? Mm-hmm. Like, what can we understand to be the question? So I like keeping the what if question present. But yes, we did start with those what ifs, and there are plenty more that we haven't gotten to.
There's so many more, and it's a little bit like Uatu himself put his finger on the sacred timeline for us, right? Because this is our 150th episode, and the What If series on DisneyPlus just ended for good, ? So why don't we actually...
Definite. Exclamation point. We're good.
So...
there's no question.
Oh, well... never say never, I guess. But yes, okay. Well,
please.
Let's talk then about season 3 of What If.
Before we get to season 3, all three of us have covered season 1 a little bit. We covered the premiere episode and Captain Carter on a bonus episode, not numbered, back in August 2021. And then we covered more thoroughly series 2. We actually went through and ranked the questions and looked at all the episodes individually. And that was back on episode 124. So people can go back and listen to those. And I think we'll start generally, and then we'll do a spoiler warning. So if you haven't watched, you're still good to listen, but we'll warn you before we get into plot details. So who wants to start with a general impression pre-spoiler warning?
I guess I'll go. And I was also thinking when you were talking about the origins of your podcast that my original design for your logo was Uatu.
Yes, correct. I still have those postcards, in fact, and stickers of Uatu on the microphone.
Yes, it was an important departure though, because it's more multiversal than just What If.
Yes.
My general impression, as I thought about this season and in context with the series, is that I remember in season 1, because it came out every week, having to reset my expectations for that whole MCU premise that it's all connected. And so there were certain episodes I liked, certain episodes I didn't, but that was still a time where I really wanted everything to like tie into everything else. It was like, oh my gosh, this What If is coming right after Loki season 1, and is it going to explore the multiverse that it set up and all this thing? And it did, but not as connected as I wanted to. Season 2, I thought then brought it all together. And I remember watching it and texting you and saying, you have to watch this. You had been a little bit behind. I knew you were going to love it. And that season 2 really had some individual episodes and then really created a new character in Cohorte and then like connected all of them at the end. So season 3, I think, is a mix of both. I think there are I went in expecting a little of season 1 and a little season 2 and got both. My general impression is that I wanted more connectivity though, because I think that's when this series works the strongest, is when you have really imaginative, fun characters, like really leaning into the what if of it all, mixed with a through line of these characters that are introduced and that we love when they show up again and kind of converge and kind of do an Avengers type thing, like happened with a certain character. I was about to spoil something
Well,
in the season.
I think you and I agree, and we didn't pre-discuss this, but I think I would frame it a little differently, because I actually think where the show is best, and this was true in the second season. The first season is very distinct. The second season, this was true, and the third season, this became even more true to me. The show is best when it's working in its own lore, and it's like telling its own story.
Yes.
That's when it really hits, and it does that at the end of the second season, and then it does it again at the end of the third season. And those are the episodes when, frankly, I multitask during this show, and I rarely multitask during shows. I multitask during this show. I'm lukewarm on it. That's fine. We can get into more specifics why. But when we got to the final two, this is no spoiler yet. When we got to the final two, I looked up. Like I was like, oh, I want to pay attention now. And so I think I see that as like the show gets almost stuck when it is trying to connect too much to the MCU, when it's trying to like pull on a thread from some obscure MCU reference. It's like it's getting trapped in that lore, and it's not able to like tell a fun, interesting story. So I think we agree. I just would I would call it something different.
Yes. Yeah, I fully agree. And I forgot what I was going to say. So Rob, go for it.
I think this is very boring, because I think I also agree with both of you really as well, that the last couple of episodes of this season really grabbed me. And I think what the series doesn't always do well, and this has been consistent throughout all three seasons, is it doesn't have often a strong what if question. Mm-hmm. And Guido, you just mentioned that's one of the fun things about this podcast, is coming up with what that question is. And sometimes it's just such and such character is in the Old West. That is not like a what if question.
And and you can even tell from the episode titles, because like that episode you're referring to, and this is not yet a spoiler, is just called What If 1872. Like they didn't even put a question in it. Whereas like the one prior to that is like, what if the emergence, blah, 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 blah. Like they clearly had thought more about the inciting incident. So yeah, I think you're right that the question framing is important. And it's funny because we've gone back and forth in the comic books that sometimes the question, I think, can be too narrowing. Like the question doesn't provide a lot of opportunity for open world building and the stuff we like in these kinds of stories. But I think you need a question ultimately, even if the question that's being asked maybe is the wrong question. There needs to be a question that's framing it. I was struck, Rob, I'm sure you had this thought or having this thought. Right before recording, we were watching a documentary about your favorite television series called Inside Number 9, which is an anthology series. And there's a moment that these two extraordinary writers and creators and showrunners were talking about how they'll often write an entire script and sort of sit with it. And then they'll sit quietly while they're collaborating for a while. And then one of them will then say like, what if? And that's how they'll get to the end. And it was really powerful to hear that, thinking about that we were going to record this episode, because I think that's what is good about a what if, what is good about that question device, and what is lacking, as you're saying, when they had an episode that wasn't organized around a clear question. It was sort of lacking that thread that I think these creators are talking about being able to pull at in that kind of collaboration.
Yeah, what I was going to say before too is that especially when you have something that's animated and you can do anything you want to, like budget is not a constriction. Like the first episode with Avengers mech, that would be a crazy expensive
right kaiju
thing, and you can do it really easily. Some of them, and this was happening season 1, but it was okay because it was introducing the premise, but I almost wanted more, and my favorite episodes of the season were more kind of wild out there, who's going to show up, and a really truly different version of these characters. And they kind of played it safe. Like some of the episodes that were just a variation of an MCU movie are not as interesting anymore. Because like to your point, Guido, it's most successful when it's telling its own story and creating its own lore. And so when those what ifs are such a drastic departure from the MCU, that's what makes it fun. Or to have someone like Tom Hiddleston voice Loki, but have it be a completely different Loki, or Laufey, right, is really, really fun and exciting, and makes this show justifies its existence, I guess, is another way of saying it too.
Yeah, I think there's a reason.
Oh, go ahead, Rob. Make your point, and then we'll go to spoiler territory.
Sure. Well, I think there's a reason why the one episode we covered from season 1 about Captain Carter, the first episode of the season, and why Captain Carter has stood out as.
Hold on. Okay, so let's do a spoiler warning, because I think with what you're about to say, it's important, because I'm sure people can assume she comes back. They don't know it. Spoiler warning. We're going to now talk about the full season of Series 3 through to the series finale of What If. So if you haven't watched it and you care about these details, stop listening and come back and listen afterwards.
She does come back here. She plays a big part in so many of the seasons. But I think, kind of going back to the what if question, why, of course, that character stands out for many reasons. We love seeing her kick ass, and Haley Atwell's
really good. Yeah, her voice acting is great. Yeah.
But I think it also goes back to the what if question, because what happens in that episode, what creates Captain Carter, is a fundamental what if question. What if Peggy Carter got the super soldier serum instead of Steve Rogers? So I think, yes, there's all these other reasons why we like that character, but it's not just, okay, we're just going to put that character in another time, or we're just going to do something fun and wacky. Those can be well done as well, but I think there's just something fundamental about us knowing what her story is from the very beginning.
Well, there's a whole narrative framing that comes with that. I agree. I was thinking during this series, when I was feeling a little lukewarm about it, even in the end, and loving the Captain Carter stuff toward the end, which we can get into details, I was thinking, though, what the series lacked was something like, what if Uncle Ben had lived? What if Mary Jane had been bitten by a radioactive spider? What if Spider-Man and Mary Jane had gotten married, right? Like, all the classic what if questions, it was lacking. And you're right, Captain Carter's story is an example of like a classic what if question. So that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that, as I just thought I loved her because she's a strong, awesome woman. But I think there are probably narrative reasons that she's so much more compelling than everyone else we're watching in that show. And her moment at the end, after she's a watcher, and like when she pushes back against the 3 evil watchers, like it's just like so rewarding because she's awesome.
Well, that's what I was saying too before. The show becomes more rewarding because we've seen Captain Carter through all 3 seasons, so we get to know her as a character. Where sometimes when they're doing these one and done episodes, like Shang-Chi and Kate Bishop, for example, we've seen Shang-Chi in one movie, which was now 3 years ago. And I love Shang-Chi. And just to put him in the Old West, which I'm also like too drawn to logic. That doesn't make any sense because the Old West happened a long time ago.
Right. And what is the what if that's resulting in that? They do a lot of temporal transposition, like Agatha also.
Well, and I think
Agatha,
but that's a kind of, but even there within the logic of the show, I think, Elliot, you put up a good point, because there we're just kind of transposing these characters to the Old West, while there's the other episode which focuses on Agatha and Kingo. Kingo. And
I guess they're both immortal.
Those characters make sense because they're basically immortal.
True.
But even there's a little bit of a logic discrepancy. It's like, well, okay, we get these 2 characters who can basically live forever being in the past, but why are these other 2 characters there without any reasoning? Yes, it's a multiverse, but when you put those 2 things in a season together, it's like, I don't know if that quite works for me.
Yeah. And the Captain Carter too. When we get to know these characters and there is a through line, even though it can be episodic, is when that really works, and that's what I like about it. So, do you want to talk about like what worked?
Yeah.
Okay. So Captain Carter works.
Yeah. Agreed.
My favorite episodes of this season were ones that took the what if premise and, like I was saying before, what you can do with animation, and just threw in everything. I don't often like wild and zany. I like more grounded stories.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of my favorite episodes was what if Howard the duck got hitched. And the reason
Really?
why I liked it is because it was surprising. Like when they're on what's the ice planet? Oh my gosh, where Laufey was born?
It's
I can't
not.
remember. Okay.
It's not
No,
Hoth. That's what I wanted to say.
that's what I almost said.
Wrong.
When the
Wrong franchise.
Yes, when they're on the ice planet of Hoth, and all of a sudden Guido shows up, and then not Hercules, Zeus shows up.
Zeus, yeah.
And
They
all the-
throw a lot into that episode, which is fun.
That's when, and Guido, I'm the same as you. I was doing something else. I was watching it with my 10-year-old and 6-year-old son, who were also somewhat bored with certain episodes, and that was a huge test for me. When that episode came on, I looked up from folding laundry, because that's what I'm doing when I'm watching the show. And then I was really engaged in it. I thought it was really fun. And so I think that another thing that works is the surprising combination of characters.
Yeah.
And that's what I loved about the last two episodes too, when
Yep.
you see grown-up Birdie played by Natasha Lyonne, which was hilarious. And you get Cohorty from the last one, and all these characters just show up, and Storm, the goddess of thunder. That's when the show really works, because you can't really do that in live action. That really worked for me too.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that both of those examples have is the Howard the Duck, which I liked. I think I liked it a little less than you, but it was also a good quest story, like a sort of a heist story. You have all the characters going for this one thing, and like it's sort of a MacGuffin, and that's really fun. It's a typical archetype, and same thing with the final two episodes. You've got like the impending doom, the world's going to be destroyed, you therefore need a force that's as strong that can combat that. Like, so they're both really typical story archetypes. Whereas if you think about even the Agatha episode, which was fun in some ways, but certainly the Kate Bishop Shang-Chi episode, and then what other episodes are in there that I'm even forgetting at this point and having watched them less than 24 hours ago. And I can't even tell you what the story arc was. Like there wasn't really an arc. You can't summarize it very easily. So I think that takes away from it.
Yeah, I think what I'm also hearing from a lot of both of you, and one question I had is, why is it animated? And I want to see on an episode, something you can only do through animation. And I think like what you're saying with that Howard the Duck episode, and certainly with the final episodes, those lend itself so well to animation. And not for us to like continue to talk down on like the Old West episode, but when you watch that, you go, okay, does this need to be animation? What are we getting from this being animated
fun? Yeah.
that we aren't getting from this being like being a live action version of this? So I think I'm constantly thinking, and I even think back to some of the other episodes that I liked from previous seasons, like the Happy Hogan like Christmas episode, and it's like I want to see the wacky zaniness that I know they're not going to do on formal MCU, or something that's budget restrained. Even though I didn't love the episode, I think the first episode with the kaiju kind of element, that is fun, because again, that's not something that we're ever going to see on screen with live action. So it works. Give it to me in animation.
Yeah. Yep. Definitely. I also, I thought of you too. I thought what really worked is this Exiles team that they put together. They call the Exiles.
I said that to Rob, and honestly, I think the show should have just been that. I think that would have been a much better show, and it maybe even would have saved the show if they had formally done that in the third season. Let's get rid of this what if structure, and let's now just assemble people from different universes and send them out on quests, because that would have been a lot more fun. It would have done everything we're describing with taking advantage of animation and subverting expectations and being able to go further, but it would have kept a story structure and kept a like arc going. So I really wish they had just been the Exiles. I really don't understand why they didn't.
And one other thing that I think really worked for me, that made me sit up and think a little bit more, was Uatu's journey. I did really like that. It just seemed a little bit delayed. Like, this is something he was breaking his own vow in season 1. He already did. So this seemed like a culmination of, and it worked for a series finale too. I really liked that message of he was supposed to learn a lesson. He didn't know what lesson he was supposed to learn. And he learned from the people he was supposed to be watching. But he says at some point to Jason Isaacs' character, I love Jason Isaacs, because we were just watching him as Lucius Malfoy, because my son's reading the series. But this idea of observing versus seeing, I really liked. There are certain moments that his arc really worked and why he was revolting against the other watchers, and that I wanted more of. Like I wanted that threaded more through the season, and then when it happened in those last two episodes, that's like you said, Guido, too. I sat up and took more notice.
Well, and if they had done away with the what if structure and been an Exiles show, you could have had more of an ongoing sort of B plot in the episodes with the Watchers Council, and you could have understood that dynamic and learned more and gone deeper with that. But instead, they just had to sort of pin it to the end of an episode to build toward the final two.
Yeah.
Yeah, one episode that really comes to mind there, well, it didn't come to mind because I completely forgot about it, is the what if the emergence destroyed the Earth episode. And right away, like that, there you go, like that what if question is not really what that episode is actually about.
No, it's just setting up the finale, yeah.
But then even then, Uatu, what he says to Riri, it does feel like tacked on. Like all Uatu says is like, fight back. And like, that's it. Like, it's like, was that enough in terms of him actually going in? It does feel like it's kind of tacked on because that episode is so full of so much other story that they're kind of cramming into 20 something minutes.
And they're trying to call back to stuff in the earlier series. Like I couldn't even follow, and I love complex world building, and there were just things that I could not make sense of here that I think they didn't only get mired when they tried to do MCU, like the Bucky Red Guardian episode. I think they got mired when they tried to get too much into their own plot circles, which that episode, to me, the Emergence one, was an example where it was like, I don't really care. I don't need to know if this is that Earth and Ultron's on that Earth and Mysterio. Who cares? Move on. Like, let's move on. Just get me where I'm going.
Yeah, and what was interesting to me too is because of the delays in Marvel Studios productions, the Red Guardian and Bucky episode felt like it might have worked if we had already seen Thunderbolts. Like there was even a scene where the elevator opens. I know you guys don't want teasers, but the Thunderbolts teaser has that almost exact scene. And especially with Riri Williams' show was supposed to air already, the Iron Man series, which I think the Hood is rumored to be in there, and they mentioned the Hood.
Red Hood is in Daredevil Born Again, played by a different actor.
I thought
that's the weird thing.
I thought the Red Hood was supposed to be in Ironheart.
Oh, maybe it's Ironheart. I thought it also Daredevil.
Anthony Ramos.
Yeah, it is Anthony Ramos. That's why it's weird that Walton Goggins was the Hood here.
Well, Walton Goggins wasn't the Hood. The sister's the Hood.
John
And then the Hood does drift off in the end. It's almost
either
like
way, it's not Anthony Ramos.
Yes, no, that's true.
That's what was interesting to me. I was like, would some of these episodes have worked if we knew the well that they were trying to draw from and the nods they were making to characters we haven't really spent a lot of time with or seen in a while, or we're supposed to have spent more time with in the MCU, and this got...
Yeah, remember there was a 10 Rings show that the sister is supposed to be in.
Yes.
That maybe it will happen, maybe it won't, but...
Guido and I actually did not know that it was Michelle Yeoh's character from Shang-Chi. We did have to look it up because we didn't.
I was like, is it Michelle Yeoh from the Ravagers? We knew it wasn't Michelle Yeoh's voice, but it was is she being the Ravagers character? No, she's being the Shang-Chi character. Well, let's talk a little bit about the MCU and where this fits into the MCU, because there are a lot of references, and I don't have the confidence in the MCU that I used to. And it's funny because I feel like I have a lot more confidence in DC. So on our Creature Commandos episode, I talked about how what was interesting in Creature Commandos is, and this is not a spoiler, it's in the first episode, which has been out for a long time now, is like Themyscira exists. Like, so they're right out the gate, and James Gunn's writing it. James Gunn's the architect of the DCU. So right out of the gate, I know as a fan of Wonder Woman, Themyscira exists. I don't know if Wonder Woman exists. I don't know what the deal with that is, but it's enough. And I now am so confident that when we get to that story, it's going to build on what was in Creature Commandos. It's going to build on this plot of this politics and the terrorist group and all that. In this case, I can't tell if things are like you're saying, like almost like a writer was told, like, use Red Guardian because we're going to see him, or use Shang-Chi's sister because she's going to be in the show. Like, I don't know if these are signposts to something we're going to see. Natasha Lyonne is a great question here. She's in Fantastic Four. Is there a chance she's Birdie in Fantastic Four? Which would be ridiculous. 100%. But like, why is she in this show and in a movie next year? I don't understand.
And I too, I had listened to an interview with Brad Winderbaum, the executive producer, who's now the head basically of Marvel Animation and TV. And I think that actually ruined the final episode for me, because he said in an interview that this was going to set up the kind of future of the multiverse saga, like the end of the multiverse saga. So I was expecting something a little bit different. Like you, Guido, I was expecting this to maybe tie in or set something up, and maybe it has, but my faith in the MCU is like, oh, so will Jeffrey Wright be the Watcher's voice in Secret Wars? Like, is that what this is going to be? Or is Peggy Carter going to show up now
as a Watcher?
As a Watcher.
Yeah.
But that's not the same ramifications as, well, we don't even know yet too, because I thought this was going to tie into Loki season 2 somehow. I was convinced.
I thought so when the Watchers were blowing them with like what looked like the sort of nullification energy and saying like, this is the end of the multiverse, like all versions of you will end. And there was the cool sequences where like different versions of the characters pull out of them. I thought, oh, this is going to be a little bit of Loki season 2. Like the tree is sort of rebuilding itself, and then they don't go there at all. Right. So I don't know why.
Whereas the end of season 2, they did show the tree. Remember, they showed the multiversal tree, and it was right with Loki season 2. So that again, expectations always ruin results sometimes, if it doesn't come true. I just was expecting there to be a little bit more time. Maybe there will be, but it wasn't the same as I was hoping for.
There was a lot of focus, I thought, on these very super powerful, out of this world beings, right? So there was like 2 episodes that featured the Celestials, which have only been in one movie that a lot of people don't even remember super well. So the fact that they were in 2 episodes here, plus you have the Watchers, plus you even have this idea of Stephen Strange existing in another universe, I was wondering, is that going to be playing a part in the future of the multiversal saga, bringing in these big cosmic beings that we've not really seen all too much on film quite yet?
But that's where part of me is like, knowing that animation takes a really long time, was it that Eternals had just sort of come out and they were like, use the Eternals, get Tiamat in there? Or was it maybe that Eternals didn't do so well and was sort of being left behind, and they were like, get Eternals in there, remind people of it? Or is it what you're saying, there's a future story that is going to use the Celestials, and so they were putting it in here? I think that's the least likely, sadly. That's my cynicism. But yeah, I don't know. Well, you're right, the Celestials are in it a lot, though.
I know some things about some upcoming movies that you don't, because you don't watch trailers. So I will say that some of this is, I think you're right, Guido.
Well, we know that Captain America involves the marbleized Tiamat or whatever.
Okay, I didn't want to spoil that for you. Yeah. So that's why I do think it's like, oh, guys, remember, this is supposed to be, that there's Tiamat. We remember, and now we want you to remember. And again, I think about my wife, who is a very casual fan. So she has not watched one episode of What If. She will not watch an episode of What If. And she'll go into Captain America, Brave New World, and not know anything. And she saw Eternals with us, and that's the last time she's thought about it. So I also think sometimes too about the really casual fans who will also probably show up to Captain America and be like, "Where's Chris Evans?" Evans movie.
Well, that's part of the issue with this series.
Yeah.
I was thinking this actually with the introduction of Storm. As much as I loved it, I was like, this is really indecipherable for someone who doesn't know this from the comics, because they don't give you anything about the origin. Not a thing. There's not, I wasn't even expecting a whole flashback sequence, but there is not even a reference to like, this Storm has Mjolnir and becomes an Asgardian god, which happens in the comics, as we all know. So like anyone who's not steeped in the lore of the comics would watch that and be like, what is this? Who is that? And why am I watching this? And that is, I think, a flaw in the show.
Well, part of that is also because the Storm is paired with the Birdie character, which both you and I, Guido, were like, who is that?
I had to look it up. I was before the reveal of who it is.
Yeah.
I was like, what is this? Who is this person?
But even watching it, I'm not sure if is it supposed to be a reveal? Are you supposed to know as soon as that character appears? I still don't quite know, and I think the fact that like that character is partnered with Storm and also partnered with another character from season 2 that we haven't seen since one episode in season 2, there's a lot going on.
Yeah. Well, I figured out when she said her duck wrists when she was playing foosball. I was like, duck wrists? I was like, oh, she's a duck. Oh, but it took like there's no such thing as a duck wrist. So yeah,
yeah. So
I agree. And what I was thinking too is that so you have this whole episode with what if Howard the Duck got hitched that sets up Birdie. They could have replaced any of the episodes that we mentioned that we barely remember what it is and told the origin of Storm, the goddess of thunder. That would have been a killer episode. It would have been great, because then it goes back to what I was saying before, which is what it's missing. You can have these one and done episodes, but if it doesn't really connect to anything, it's completely forgettable.
Yeah. Cool. So yeah, I don't imagine I'll ever go revisit any of What If I were to, under duress, it would be like the finales of each season.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much it.
I will end with a positive thing, is that I really, and I don't know if it's just the way that I like to watch or that it was exciting for my children, I liked the one episode a day during the holiday season. It felt like
the release schedule.
On break from work. My kids are on break. We woke up every single morning. Last year we did the same thing. And it was it's a little advent calendar. It was like one episode a day. And if there was a little bit of a cliffhanger, like the second the watcher gets in trouble, I was like, ooh, and we all kind of perked up. We're like, ooh, what's going to happen to him? Well, we'll just figure it out tomorrow morning. We'll watch at 6:30 a.m. again. So
I agree. I like that schedule. It's a stunning work of art. I think the animation, the final fight with the Watchers could have been like really hard to follow, rushed, but it was not. It was gorgeous. It was like perfectly comic booky and anime-esque, but also like the kind of sort of they're going for the hand-drawn look of animation, and I thought it was just beautiful and perfect visually.
And Guido, I know you've gotten really into like kind of fan edits too. Like I think it really makes sense to do like a fan edit of these 3 seasons where you basically got the Captain Carter episodes, you have the season finales, as you just said, and then that's it, and we kind of get rid of the rest. And then let's follow Captain Carter, let's follow Uatu, and that's the show.
Yeah. I agree.
Let's make the Dear Watchers cut.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my gosh, we should make the Dear Watchers
Release the Dear Watchers cut.
Gosh, one day when I'm really bored, maybe I'll do that.
Well, speaking of Dear Watchers, why don't we go into our own past a little bit and talk about some favorite episodes in multiverses. It's Exploring Multiversity.
I am your guide through these vast new realities. Follow me and ponder the question, what if?
And today we are asking the question...
Do we need to change out that sound clip one day? Maybe now the series is over. Go ahead.
The Jason Isaacs one, I really like that part.
Oh,
that's true.
That was very fun. Yeah.
But anyway, Rob, I interrupted your question. What is our question today?
what if each of us had 3 favorite alternate world / episodes that we've covered in our last 150 episodes?
Woohoo! All right, let's go. Let's go one around. Who's starting? We'll do 3 rounds. Who's
I'll
kicking
kick us off.
Okay.
And this might just be recency bias, but I'm going to actually name our last episode, which was episode 149, What If Santa Claus and Christmas Were Saved by Superman and Doctor Doom. But I'm saying this for a specific reason, which is that, especially focusing on the Superman episode there, because we haven't covered too much Silver Age DC, Silver Age Superman, and anyone who knows or who's ever picked up one knows those are just bonkers comic books, and this is no exception because it's all about Superman trying to get Santa Claus to lose some weight so he can save Christmas, and it's just wacky and weird. And we haven't the fact that we haven't actually handled or covered too many of those episodes, it was like, oh, that really stands out in my mind.
Yeah, I like it. That's a good one. All right.
I also think we're going to be getting a lot of Silver Age Superman coming up because I think the new Superman movie is going to be a real nod to Silver Age Superman.
Yeah, and it's going to inspire certainly our reading interests.
Yes.
All right, I'll go next. I'm going in reverse order, but mine is not quite as recent. I'm going back to episode 132, which was actually What If number 100, which is a big anniversary issue where Sinister, Rogue, and Gambit they're searching for this secret thing that is will unlock the secrets of the universe. And on the final page, it's that meta moment where they unlock what Sinister has been coming after, and it's all the Marvel comics. And I just love, I love that story. I like meta stories, as everyone who listens knows, and that was a real fun one with some of my favorite characters. So I love that. What if?
I have four on my mind, so I'm trying to figure out which one I need to cut. I guess I'll start with an earlier one, and I didn't write down the episode numbers. You guys have them all memorized though, so you'll know which one I'm talking about.
Right, exactly.
It's I think I was on this episode. Maybe.
I love that you don't remember.
What if Magneto and Professor X formed the X-Men together? And I like that because it was also our chance to. It was right when House of X Powers of 10 was coming out also, and that was now that X-Men is kind of back and the Krakoa era is over. It does that era does almost feel like an alternate reality. One that history was changed where Magneto and Professor X did form the X-Men together. It remains one of my favorite comic storylines of all time because of Jonathan Hickman's writing, because of Pepe Larraz's and Marta Gracia's artwork. I just love that story, and I love that episode and talking about. It's a great what if question because it changes the history of the Marvel Universe if they form that together. And I like that idea of two people wanting the same thing but coming at it from two different ideas, working together to try to make a new reality. I think we need more of that in the world. And
And that was episode 21, if people want to go back and listen to it.
Good memory.
Way back when. Yeah, exactly. I retrieved it from the memory banks. All right, Rob, what's next?
Well, listeners of the podcast will know I do love a villain, so I could have chosen several of the One Bad Day comics from DC because they're all so good, but I went with episode 96, which is What If Batman's villain Clayface had one bad day in Hollywood. And I think I was a little inspired by having just seen a Hollywood episode of What If, which was so maybe in how they approach things, and then just also hosting this Batman movie where Batman is kind of off to the side. He's not really the focus of that movie. The villains are really the focus of the movie. So I was thinking, oh, here is a comic that does a great job of putting the villain front and center and really going back to their roots of like, oh, what if you could become anyone and you could change your appearance? Of course you are going to be an actor and you're struggling. Yes, you're a villain, you're murdering all these people, but at the same time you're also dealing with all the issues that so many people have as an actor in Hollywood. It's such a great, brilliant comic, and I loved covering it.
It is, and as we posted on our social media, when James Gunn formally made official that Mike Flanagan's Clayface is happening, he posted that cover. So maybe it will be an inspiration.
Yeah.
Rob, I haven't texted you since that news came out. Are you super excited for it?
I am. I'm only hesitant because I know Mike Flanagan, who I do love, and just saw New York Comic Con this past year. I know he's not directing the movie, and I know sometimes in Hollywood, of course, writing the screenplay and not being directing it means someone else comes in and kind of changes your work, but they keep your name on it. So I'm hoping that
we trust James Gunn. So
yes,
we trust in Gunn.
But I definitely think that they will be using this as a jumping off point.
Yeah,
I would not be surprised whatsoever.
That's cool.
All right, my next pick is 3 episodes in one, because I am, of course, choosing Age of Apocalypse, which we covered in episodes 107, 109, and 111. It was the biggest coverage we've done, and it was so much fun. I love the story. I love the world. It is, I think, probably one of the most iconic. It's probably Marvel's most iconic alternate universe, and then compared to Kingdom Come, maybe they're tied even. So I think it is so good and so much to talk about that we needed 3 episodes to do it. And I look forward to another complex mega world 3-part episode, but that one was great to do.
Well, if true to form, if Rob picks a villain and Guido picks the X-Men, my second choice has to be Superman. And I picked the episode where you covered Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, the Alan Moore.
Oh, yes.
And I love that it's just an alternate. I don't usually like endings.
You were on it, by the way.
I was on that one,
You
too.
said you covered, but you're on it. It's episode 62.
Right. I don't usually like the last stories of characters. Like, I don't like when Marvel does, like, the last Daredevil story.
The end, yeah.
Yeah, the end. Because it doesn't really work with these continuing characters. I don't really like that. And I love that story. And I think it's present in my mind because one of my favorite alternate realities is the Superman and Lois universe from the TV show that just wrapped up. And they did a little bit of what Alan Moore did and really closed out what would happen if Superman grew up and got older and had this life with Lois. And it's just one of the most beautiful final episodes in a season of, or multiple seasons, a series that I just really loved. And so I like imagining those types of universes, and Alan Moore nods all the Silver Age Superman and the silliness of kind of the Silver Age Superman, and then ends with a literal wink, which I
Yeah, that was a good world. All right, Rob, what's your final pick for favorite world we've covered?
Well, my second pick was episode 96, and now my final pick is episode 95. That was a good stretch for us right there.
I guess so. The golden age.
The golden age. And it is What If Josie and the Pussycats Saved the World from Being Destroyed by Teenagers Turned into Capitalist Zombies. And that is us covering the Josie and the Pussycats movie starring Rachel Lee Cook. And I love this episode for several reasons. For one, of course, we had our other most frequent guest on the show, Ethan from Make Mine Amalgam, who is always, Elliot shaking his head, his nemesis. But it's always great to have Ethan on the show. He's such an expert on Amalgam Comics, but also especially Josie and the Pussycats, maybe one of the biggest Josie, or maybe the biggest Josie and the Pussycats fan out there in the world. And it was great hearing his insights on this, but I also do love when we move beyond just comics and also talk about comic adaptations on film. And this was great because this was a movie that I dismissed growing up because I was a film snob, and it was like, there's no way I'm seeing Josie and the Pussycats with Tara Reid, and it's like, oh no. But then, like, watching it as an adult, it was like, oh my gosh, this is such a clever satire. I loved it. It was really funny, and I love going outside of DC and Marvel too, because almost my other choice was the Josie and the Pussycats in Outer Space, where it's like actually like a really legitimate good horror comic as well. So there we go. All things Josie and the Pussycats.
I like it. All right. My final pick is not a world that we covered, but you did say world or episode. And I'm going to have to go with our first anniversary episode, episode number 54, which brought together all of our, or many of our, not all, but many of our podcasting friends. And we played games and trivia, and it was so much fun and so special. And we've talked over and over and over again over the years about how meaningful the show has been for the connections and the relationships that it has created. But that episode was just, even just to be able to get the 10 people or 12 people on a Zoom call at one time and record a live episode was so amazing. But to have former guests like Carrie Harris, and to have our podcasting friends like Brad and Lisa and Jake and Mike and Jessica, and just so many people were able to join. And of course, Elliot, and we played games, and it was just so much fun. I will always remember that episode really distinctly and that experience. So,
and I had forgotten, actually, Elliot, that you designed some really awesome artwork for that episode. Us as like
the Brady
Hollywood
Bunch,
Squares, the Brady Bunch.
Oh,
yeah, Hollywood Squares.
No, Hollywood Squares. It was more Hollywood Squares than Brady Bunch. That's right.
I hadn't seen it.
He's drawn so many things you didn't remember.
You have drawn so many things, but I was scrolling through the episodes looking, and I saw that one too, Guido, and I was like, oh my gosh, this artwork is so fun. So thank you for doing that, even though you don't remember.
I don't remember it.
I might have just taken all of his drawings, and I might have put them in the square.
Oh, maybe you put it.
That might be why he doesn't remember, but certainly the illustrations were his. But
I love that episode too. I've forgotten about it. I remember because I listened to all those podcasters. I was almost starstruck. I was really nervous. I never talked to Brad and Lisa. I'd never met Jake. I'd never seen Mike and Jessica. Like I'd never to attach the names and faces. That was really fun. That was cool. My third and final one is more recent. It's your coverage of the absolute DC universe and DC All In.
Oh.
I'm really enjoying that. I like the Ultimate Marvel universe also. There's something about these characters that have been around for such a long time and reinventing them, and you guys did such an awesome job of I know I wasn't on that episode. I know that for a fact.
You weren't. And it was episode 147, so recent.
Yes, very recent. I just love the writing and art is great. I'm really, and it gets me, like I was saying at the beginning of the episode, excited for the future of what these stories are going to be. I love reading Superman and Batman and Spider-Man and all these characters, and there's just something about putting them in new contexts and having the writers just get to be more imaginative with them and not be beholden or weighed down maybe even by 80 plus years of continuity and history is making it fresh and exciting. And so that's a universe I really enjoy and in Elseworlds I like reading about.
You will have to do maybe a 1-year check-in next year after they get to issue 12 and see where they're at after Wave 2 comes out. There's plenty to talk about there.
Well, what a great segue.
Speaking of which, Rob,
yes.
Get on it.
Speaking of the future, let's all ponder some possibilities.
Will the future you describe be averted, averted?
So,
right.
Guido, what are we talking
we don't
about
have
for
much...
pondering possibilities? Yeah.
We don't have much time for our final segment, but we will just glimpse what worlds should we be covering next. And this is kind of a wish list, but probably also realistically gonna be where we go. So we want to hear from all of our listeners. Please send us an email, go to dearwatchers.com, find us online at Dear Watchers, and tell us what worlds you want us to cover. But all of us thought a little bit about what we think we should be covering next. So who wants to start? I'll
go. Okay, there you go. You
Look
go.
at all of us. Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh.
So excited for the future. Everyone say all theirs one at a time, all at the same time. Ready?
So I will start. I think we've done a few licensed adaptations We've done, as you mentioned, Josie and the Pussycats, though that's an unusual one. We've done Tomb Raider. We've done some video games. But you and I both love the Child's Play movies, and there's a comic book adaptation of that. There's a long-running comic book adapting the Fright Night movie. There's so many sort of weird, I mean, we could do the Alf comic book. Like, there's so many adaptations of things, and I would like us to explore more adaptations and figure out how multiversal they are or how canonical they are. The other thing that I want is tying back to our what if conversation. I want us to cover more Exiles, because Exiles is the promise of what if delivered through characters and interplay. And the series, I think, Rob, you would love it. And it's written by former Real World star Judd Winnick, and it's funny and touching and goes places that you can't go without the multiversal aspect. And so I think it does everything we want it to do, and we haven't covered it. So Exiles and licensed adaptations. Who's next?
Well, mine kind of first one jumps off of yours a little bit there, Guido, which is you mentioned adaptations, and I'll be even more specific and say I'd love to cover the original Superman films and the original Batman films, neither of which we've covered. Of course, we've got the new Superman movie coming out. Batman's fresh in my mind because, as you said, we just hosted a Batman screening. And, of course, those have lived on now in the comic book adaptations as also. And even I'd say, like, Batman 66. I'd love to talk about that and do some of the comic adaptations.
Yeah, and we have
there
Superman
also.
78 and Batman 89. Yeah.
And I know, of course, Elliot will murder us if he's not on the Superman the movie episode.
I just finished today the Donner cut. I hadn't seen it since it first came out. Superman 2, the Richard Donner cut. Yeah.
Well, and speaking of Superman, I also mentioned earlier that I loved doing that Silver Age comic, and I'd love to also do some more Silver Age comics. One character or one line that jumped to mind was, you mentioned us doing the amazing episode with other podcasts, and one of the things we did was we made up fake things that Jimmy Olsen had done, and people had to guess which one wasn't real. And we were just at a comic book store yesterday where it was like one Jimmy Olsen's getting attacked by Crypto, one of them he's in drag, and I'd love just to do some Jimmy Olsen, do some Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane, which we covered one of those, but love to do some
all
more
those
of those
imaginary
super
stories,
wacky imaginary stories.
That'd be pretty fun. Well, I was going to segue from Guido's also because first on my list was Exiles because of what I've never read it either. So I know
you can read along with us.
Yes. And so that's on my list for you to cover. And my other two are just kind of boring run-of-the-mill superhero comics, but it's what I love to read. I would love to see you do more DC Elseworlds. I think DC is, as we've talked about before in our New York City Comic-Con episode, is just this all-in and the absolute universe. They're just knocking it out of the park. Their quality, the art, the writing is probably the best in the mainstream business. And I would love to listen and hear and explore more of their Elseworlds from the past. And like you just suggested, check in with the absolute universe in a year also.
And they have the new Elseworlds titles out now. There's the Dark Green Lantern. There's the sequel to Gotham by Gaslight. Well, the third sequel to Gotham by Gaslight. So, yeah, there's Elseworlds.
It feels like this
now
whole
we could cover.
Pondering Possibilities is very DC heavy. I know you mentioned Exiles, but there's a lot of DC happening. Not as much Marvel, it seems.
No, Exiles came up twice, so we're even. We're even. Even though, yes, all three of us are more excited for DC right now, but we're even.
Well, also DC, just because they've leaned in the multiverse more, when I look at my comic book shelf, most of the stories that I have, most of the trades and omnibuses are from standalone Superman and Batman stories. And so I would love to cover All-Star Superman and Superman Peace on Earth. These just work without continuity. They're just these standalone stories. And that's on my list as well. And lastly is, I think, have you touched on this or not? Or maybe we just talked about it, is Marvel's new Ultimate line. in thinking about.
We only referred to it when we were talking about Absolute because we were talking about the regenesis of the Ultimate Universe, but we haven't covered any of the new Ultimate Universe, and we barely covered the original Ultimate Universe, which will probably stay that way. But the new one is worth covering.
Yeah, and Ultimate Spider-Man just was one of my favorite. It's comic series of the year, and I want to just explore that more and see where that's going. And it's kind of fun too, and to also juxtapose it to the original and what makes some of these work better and what makes them maybe not as exciting would be fun to explore.
Yeah.
So
we've got our work cut out for us, but we're staying on that every other week schedule, so it'll take us some time. But I think
that's a wrap.
That is a wrap on our 150th, though with bonus episodes, more like 155th episode. Thank you, dear watchers, for listening. Tell us what we should be covering. In the meantime, I have been Guido.
And I have been Rob.
And I've been the love child of Chris Evans. And
our reading list, which is a watching list today, is in the show notes. Follow us on all social media, dear watchers.
Leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen, and we'll be back soon with another trip through the multiverse.
In the meantime, keep pondering the possibilities.
Thanks for having me, guys. Love you.